70 years. I whispered the number to myself as I smoothed the white tablecloth over the dining room table, my hands brushing against the worn lace edges. It didn't feel like 70 inside my bones, not most days. But my joints told another story when I bent too low, and the mirror, well, she didn't lie either. My reflection had softened into something grandmotherly long before I felt ready. Still, tonight was mine. My birthday. A milestone that felt both heavy and light at once. The house smelled of roasted chicken and fresh rolls, the way it always did on family nights, though truth be told, I hadn't cooked much this time. My daughter, Clara, insisted on handling the food, but I had stayed in the kitchen anyway, fussing over details no one else would notice, making sure the forks lined up, lighting the old candles in the glass jars along the windowsill, checking the cake 3 times, though the bakery box was already sealed. This house had been mine for nearly 5 decades, bought with my late husband when our dreams still felt endless. Every room carried a memory. His boots by the door, our children's first steps down the hallway, the sound of Christmas mornings with paper flying and squeals echoing. I wanted tonight to feel like one of those memories, but as I placed the last plate, I could sense the air was heavier than it should have been. The front door creaked, and in came my son David, tall and broad-shouldered, his booming voice filling the room. He hugged me, but it was quick, distracted. Behind him came Clara with her casserole and her ever-present sigh, and then Mark, my youngest, already on his phone, his eyes flicking up only long enough to say, "Happy birthday, Mom." 70 looks good on you, David said, though his eyes were already scanning the dining room as if appraising it. "I'll take your word for it," I chuckled, though my chest tightened at the way his gaze lingered on the family photographs along the wall. Dinner started warmly enough. The grandkids clattered their forks, laughing and bickering over the last dinner roll, while my children traded stories about work and weather, but I could hear the undercurrents, sharp as knives under the table. Clara teased David about not visiting often, and David snapped back about how much money he'd spent helping with the roof repairs last winter. Mark muttered something about being the only one who still lived close enough to check on me. The words house, responsibility, and fair share slid into conversation like uninvited guests. My name wasn't even mentioned, just Mom's place and when the time comes. I sipped my iced tea slowly, willing myself to ignore it, but the laughter felt thinner, the warmth weaker. They thought they were whispering, disguising their arguments under layers of banter, but I heard it all. The house I loved was turning into a prize in their minds, a trophy they believed they deserved for, reasons they recited like courtroom evidence. As the cake was carried out, lit with 70 flickering candles, I closed my eyes. Everyone clapped, waiting for me to make a wish. I wanted to wish for peace, for family unity, for something simple and soft, but instead a thought pressed itself against my chest, unexpected and unrelenting. Let me be seen for who I am, not what I leave behind. When I opened my eyes, their faces glowed in the candlelight. For a moment, I almost believed in the picture-perfect family gathered around me. But deep down, I knew the cracks were widening, and my birthday was only the beginning. The first slice of cake should have been sweet, but it stuck in my throat like dry bread. I watched the frosting smear across my plate while my children's voices grew louder around me. They thought they were talking to one another, but every word felt like it was aimed straight at me. "You know, Mom really shouldn't be living here all by herself," Clara said, her fork tapping against her glass. She always had a way of sounding practical, though her tone carried judgment more than care. "It's too much house. I think she'd be happier if she stayed with me. I have the space." David gave a sharp laugh, leaning back in his chair like he was in a courtroom ready to present his case. "Happier with you? Clara, you can barely keep your own place running. You really think you can manage this house too? I've already poured thousands into keeping this roof over her head. If anyone should handle it, it's me." Mark finally looked up from his phone, his face flushed with irritation. "You two act like she's already gone. I'm the one here every week checking on her, making sure she's okay. Neither of you even bother to stop by unless there's a holiday or a leak." Their voices tangled like storm winds, rising and crashing over one another. My grandchildren shifted uncomfortably in their seats, pretending to focus on their plates, and I felt my stomach twist. My birthday table, the one I had dreamed would be filled with warmth and laughter, had become a battleground. I stared at the lace tablecloth, remembering the way my husband and I had picked it out together in a small shop downtown, laughing at how fancy it felt for two young kids just starting out. Now, 40-some years later, it was stained with little dots of wine and sauce, and layered with the tension of children who saw my home as an inheritance waiting to be claimed. My mind drifted to each of them, to the lives they had built. Clara, always the caretaker but burdened with bitterness from her divorce and years of financial struggle. David, successful in business but distant, treating everything like a negotiation. And Mark, my baby, still searching for steady ground, loyal but restless. I loved them all, deeply and fiercely, but sitting there, I couldn't ignore the way their love for me was tangled with something else, something that felt more like possession than affection. "Enough," I finally whispered, though the word was swallowed by their bickering. My voice had grown softer over the years, but in that moment, I wished I could summon the steel it once carried. Instead, I lifted my fork, taking another bite of cake, forcing it down as the sweetness turned to ash in my mouth. I smiled at my grandchildren, clapping my hands gently to draw their attention back to me. But inside, a quiet ache spread across my chest. It wasn't just disappointment I felt, it was invisibility. They weren't fighting over me. They were fighting over what I owned, over bricks and lumber, over the four walls I had filled with love. And as I watched them spar, I realized, with a pang of clarity, I was disappearing from my own story, replaced by the house they believed would define me. I folded my napkin in my lap, slow and deliberate, as if grounding myself. No, I thought. I am more than this house, more than their arguments, and they'll see it one day, whether they like it or not. The celebration pressed on, but the joy had already drained out of the room. I kept my smile painted on, though my heart was quietly breaking. Amid the clinking of forks and the thin laughter trying to stitch the night back together, I felt a pair of eyes on me. Not sharp or judgmental, but gentle, steady in a way that steadiness feels when the world is wobbling. It was Ruth, my neighbor of nearly 20 years, sitting quietly at the far end of the table. She wasn't blood, but in many ways, she had been more family to me than my own children. We'd shared fences, tomato plants, and more cups of coffee on her porch than I could count. When my husband passed, she was the one who slipped casseroles onto my doorstep, then sat with me until my tears dried. She had never once made me feel like a burden. Now, she watched me with those kind eyes, catching every wince I tried to hide, every forced smile I pressed on my lips. When our gazes met, she gave the smallest nod, just enough to remind me that someone still saw me, not just the house I lived in. The conversation at the table had shifted again, this time to taxes and property values. David was talking about how much the market had gone up in our neighborhood, his voice carrying that hungry edge, while Clara muttered about upkeep costs. Mark rolled his eyes, but even he couldn't hide the way his glance lingered on the walls. I wanted to scream, to tell them that this home wasn't a pawn on their chessboard, that every nail in these walls carried pieces of my heart. Instead, I sipped my tea, pretending to be deaf to their words. The candles were lit again, glowing on the cake like little torches of hope. My grandchildren gathered around, eager to sing once more, their voices sweet and untainted by the arguments swirling in the air. I closed my eyes, letting their small voices wash over me. When I blew the candles out, I didn't make a wish this time. I prayed. Not for riches, not for health. I prayed for the strength to hold on to myself, no matter how much they tried to erase me. As the smoke curled into the air, Ruth leaned closer. Her hand brushed mine under the table, slipping something discreetly into my palm. An envelope. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Happy birthday, this one's just for you." I froze, my fingers curling around the thin paper. The edges pressed into my skin, sharp enough to ground me back in my body. I looked at her, confused, but she just smiled and returned her attention to the table, as though nothing had happened. The rest of the night blurred after that. The bickering faded to background noise. The laughter came in uneven bursts, and the cake dwindled down to crumbs. My children hugged me goodnight, each one of them pretending in their own way that the evening had been just another family celebration. But I knew better. When the last dish was rinsed and the house grew quiet, I finally slipped into my room and pulled the envelope from my pocket. It was light, almost fragile, but it hummed with a kind of weight I couldn't explain. For the first time that evening, my lips curved into a real smile. Not because I knew what was inside, but because Ruth had given it with such quiet intention. It wasn't about the paper. It was about me. She had remembered me. She had seen me. And in that moment, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt all night. Anticipation. I waited until the last dish was stacked in the drying rack and the hum of the dishwasher filled the kitchen before retreating to my bedroom. The house was finally quiet. My children had driven off in their separate directions, carrying their arguments with them like old coats they refused to shed. The silence felt heavier than the noise had, but in my hand was the envelope Ruth had slipped me, still warm from where it had rested in my pocket all evening. I sat down on the edge of my bed, the floral quilt bunching beneath me. My fingers traced the envelope's edges, hesitant, almost afraid. Something in Ruth's eyes when she gave it to me had told me this wasn't just a card with kind words or a little gift card to my favorite diner. No, it carried a different weight, like she knew it would matter in ways I couldn't yet see. Finally, I tore it open, my breath catching as the flap peeled back. Inside was not a card, but a single sheet of paper folded neatly around something else. When I unwrapped it, my heart skipped. There it was, my lottery ticket, the one I had bought weeks ago in secret. I remembered the day clearly. It had been one of those dull Tuesdays when the world felt too small, when I had stood in line at the corner gas station with nothing but bread and milk in my basket. My eyes had landed on the bright colors of the lottery display, and on a whim, an impulse I could barely explain, I bought one. Not because I expected to win, not because I needed to, but because something deep in me craved the possibility. The act itself was like a small rebellion, proof that even at 70 I could still want more from life, but I hadn't trusted myself to keep it safe. My children often stopped by unannounced, rifling through drawers, asking questions about my bills, offering help that felt more like intrusion. I couldn't risk them finding it and asking questions, so I had walked it straight to Ruth's house, laughing nervously as I handed it over. "Keep this for me," I had said. "I don't want anyone else knowing I bought it." She had tucked it into her kitchen drawer without hesitation, no questions asked, only giving me that knowing look of hers, the one that always said she understood me without needing an explanation. Now, weeks later, she had returned it, and my breath caught when I unfolded the sheet completely and saw the numbers printed there. Numbers I had memorized without meaning to, etched into my mind after the drawing. They were the winning numbers, all of them. The ticket trembled in my hands, the edges fluttering with my uneven breath. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it, that my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. I dug into my nightstand drawer, pulling out the old newspaper clipping I had saved, the one I'd studied a dozen times since the draw. But there it was, in black and white. The jackpot, the numbers, the validation that what I held was no dream. I pressed my hand to my mouth, tears springing hot and fast. Not from greed, not from visions of mansions or yachts, but from the sudden realization that my life was no longer cornered. My children had spent the night circling my house like vultures, believing this was the sum of my worth, And here I sat holding proof that my future was bigger than any set of four walls. The room spun as I clutched the ticket to my chest, rocking back and forth like I was holding a newborn. At 70, I had thought my choices were over, my path already carved out. But this little slip of paper whispered otherwise. It whispered, "Your story isn't finished yet." I don't know how long I sat there. The lottery ticket clutched to my chest like it was the last lifeboat on a sinking ship. Time stretched in strange ways. Minutes felt like hours, yet hours seemed to pass without me moving an inch. The house creaked around me, settling into its night rhythm, but my mind refused to quiet. A part of me wanted to laugh. Imagine a 70-year-old woman sitting on her bed in her slippers, holding a piece of paper worth more than her children's wildest arguments. If the universe had a sense of humor, this was it. But the laughter never came. Instead, I cried. Not loud sobs, not the messy kind that twist your face and leave you gasping. These were quiet tears, the kind that slip down your cheeks because your heart is too full and too heavy all at once. I thought about the evening, about Clara's sharp words, David's smug smirk, Mark's simmering resentment, about the way none of them had asked me what I wanted. Not once. I wasn't their mother anymore, not really. I had become a symbol, a caretaker of an object they believed they were entitled to. The house was their prize. I was simply the keeper of the keys until I stepped aside. But now the house seemed so small, so insignificant compared to what rested in my palm. That slip of paper meant more than money. It meant choice, freedom, possibility. At 70, I had believed those things belonged only to younger women, those with strong legs and unlined faces, with time to chase what they wanted. But here it was, waiting for me. I thought about what I could do. Travel, maybe. I had always dreamed of seeing the Grand Canyon, of standing at the edge of something so vast it made my worries look like dust. Or perhaps I'd buy a little cabin near the ocean, where I could fall asleep to the sound of waves instead of the creak of pipes. I could give too, quietly, to causes that mattered, to people who needed a chance more than my children needed another argument about property. The strangest thing was how quickly the fear melted away. All my life I had been careful, cautious. Every dollar stretched, every decision weighed. Even the lottery ticket had been a secret rebellion, one I never expected to amount to anything. And yet, holding the winning numbers in my hand, I felt bold for the first time in decades. It wasn't greed that burned inside me. It was power, not the kind my children wielded in their words, but the quiet, steady kind. The kind that whispered, "You can choose now. You don't have to live by anyone else's script." I stood and walked through the house, the ticket pressed safely against my chest. Each room carried its ghosts. The hallway where David had once raced his siblings until the lamp broke. The kitchen where Clara baked her first pie, proud even though it burned. The den where Mark had fallen asleep on his father's lap during countless football games. This house was more than wood and nails. It was me. It was us. And yet, I realized it wasn't the only thing that defined me. For years, I had let myself be contained by these walls, believing they were the sum of my worth. But tonight, with this secret pressed to my heart, I saw it clearly. The house might hold my past, but the ticket in my hand held my future. And for the first time in a long while, the future belonged to me. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, bright and merciless. I brewed my coffee as usual, though my hands trembled each time I reached for the pot. The lottery ticket sat hidden inside the drawer of my nightstand, tucked between old photographs and birthday cards. Just knowing it was there made the air feel different, lighter, sharper. But the phone rang before I could take a sip. "Mom, we need to talk about the house." David's voice boomed, already clipped and businesslike. "I've been running numbers. You can't maintain this place much longer. Property taxes alone. I'm fine, David, I interrupted, though my tone lacked its old bite. Fine for now, he countered, but it makes more sense for me to take it off your hands before it falls apart. I could sell it for a good price. You'd have less to worry about. Less to worry about, as if worrying was the only thing left in my life. I let him talk, his words washing over me, and hung up with a polite promise to think about it. Minutes later, Clara showed up unannounced, casserole dish in hand. She fussed over me, straightening things that didn't need straightening, clucking her tongue at the clutter on the counter. You shouldn't be rattling around in this big place by yourself, she said, sliding the dish into my fridge like she already owned the shelf space. Why don't you move in with me? I take such good care of you. We'd be together, and you wouldn't have to lift a finger. Her words might have sounded kind to anyone else, but I heard the undercurrent, her desperate need for stability, for something solid to lean on, not me, but the house, the assurance it could bring. By evening, Mark called. His tone was softer, almost pleading. Mom, I know I don't have the money like David or the house like Clara, he said, but I've been the one here for you. Don't you think that should matter? If anyone deserves to keep this place, it's me. I won't let it go. Deserves. The word hit me like a stone. Each of my children used it, in one form or another. They deserved the house. They deserved my sacrifices. They deserved pieces of me, parceled out like I was nothing more than an estate to divide. What none of them said, not once, was, Mom, what do you want? I set the phone down after Mark's call, staring at the fading light stretching across the living room. The same living room where my husband and I had danced barefoot after moving in, where birthdays and Christmases had filled the air with laughter. My children saw only walls and value. I saw a life. My life. And yet, as I listened to their arguments echo in my head, I felt a strange calm, because I knew something they didn't. I wasn't trapped by their demands. The house wasn't the anchor they believed it to be. I let them speak, let them circle like restless hawks, while the truth stayed locked in my nightstand drawer. The lottery ticket was mine alone, my secret tether to freedom. For years I had bent to their needs, to their opinions, to their judgment. But now, for the first time, I didn't need to argue back. I didn't need to defend myself. I had nothing to prove to them. Let them think I was powerless. Let them think they were circling the prize. All the while, the real prize, the real power, was folded quietly in my drawer, waiting for the day I would use it. And oh, how I planned to use it. For the next few days, I carried my secret like a flame cupped in my hands, fragile, flickering, but alive. The lottery ticket stayed tucked in the drawer of my nightstand, wrapped in an old handkerchief, but in truth, it might as well have been stitched into my skin. I felt it with every step I took, every breath I drew. My children kept circling, calling, visiting, pressing their cases about the house. Their persistence was relentless, but instead of breaking me down, it only sharpened my resolve. Each conversation reminded me just how invisible I had become to them. To them, I wasn't a woman. I was an obligation, a stepping stone, a piece of property standing in the way of their next gain. So I stopped listening. I smiled politely, nodded when they spoke, and let their words flow past me like water over stone. Because deep down, I knew the truth. I was no longer theirs to claim. One afternoon, I slipped out of the house and walked the few blocks to Ruth's porch. She was already waiting with 2 mugs of coffee, as if she had known I'd come. That was Ruth, always 2 steps ahead, always steady. You opened it, she said simply, passing me a mug. I nodded, my throat tightening. I did, and Ruth, it's real. It's all real. Her smile was small but fierce, the kind of smile that said she had believed in me even before I believed in myself. So, what will you do with it? She asked. That was the question, wasn't it? For the first time in decades, I had options, and options felt intoxicating. I I hesitated, staring into the swirl of steam rising from my cup. I want to live, Ruth. Not just survive. Not just wait for the days to pass. I want to see places I've only dreamed about. I want to give to people who need it more than my children need another reason to fight. And I want... My voice broke, and I surprised myself with the rawness of it. I want to feel like me again. Not just their mother, not just a widow in a too-big house, but a woman who still has a story left to write. Ruth reached across the small table and squeezed my hand. Then that's exactly what you'll do. After that, I started making quiet moves. I scheduled a discreet meeting with a lawyer downtown, telling my children I had errands. I asked questions about trusts, donations, ways to secure my winnings without drawing attention. I requested travel brochures from the library, Alaska cruises, cross-country train rides, even guided tours through Europe. Just holding them in my hands made my heart race like it hadn't in years. I also found myself looking at charities I'd always admired. The local women's shelter, the library struggling to keep its doors open, the food bank Ruth volunteered at every Thanksgiving. The idea of helping others, of leaving a legacy that wasn't just about walls and bricks, filled me with a joy my children's arguments never could. The irony wasn't lost on me. My children were clawing at one another for ownership of this house, a place built on my sweat and sacrifice. And yet, I was planning a life none of them could imagine, one that had nothing to do with this house at all. At 70, I thought my life was winding down. But sitting across from Ruth, travel brochures spread across her porch table, I realized something breathtaking. I was finally free to choose. And for the first time in decades, the choice was mine alone. A week later, I called my children to the house. They came, each of them carrying their arguments like weapons disguised as concern. I had set the table again, not for a feast this time, but for a conversation that would not end with raised voices or thinly veiled greed. They sat where they always sat. David at the head, Clara close to me, Mark slouched in the chair by the window. They looked at me with expectation, like a jury waiting for the verdict. "I've been thinking about the house," I began, my voice steady. Their eyes sharpened, leaning forward like hounds scenting the hunt. "And?" David pressed, his tone clipped. "And I want you to know," I said slowly, deliberately, "this house is not a prize to be won. It is not a burden to be passed around, nor a trophy for who can shout the loudest. It is my home, my choice, and it will be handled on my terms, not yours." Silence. Clara opened her mouth, but I raised my hand, stopping her before she could speak. "For 70 years, I've given you everything I could. I raised you. I sacrificed. I made this house a sanctuary for all of you. But I am more than these walls. I am more than what you think you're owed. I am not invisible." Their faces shifted. Anger in David's, disbelief in Clara's, hurt in Mark's. But I didn't waver. Not this time. "You will know what I decide when the time is right," I continued. "Until then, the matter is closed. If you love me, let that be enough. If not..." I let the sentence hang in the air, sharp as a blade. They left soon after, grumbling among themselves, each frustrated at my refusal to bend. But I didn't feel guilt, not this time. I felt light, unshackled. When the door shut behind them, I stepped onto the porch, the evening sun painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The envelope rested in my pocket, the ticket still safe, still mine. I pressed my hand against it, feeling its quiet power, not because it was money, not because it was wealth, but because it was freedom. I thought of my husband, of the life we had built together. He had always said I was stronger than I knew. For years, I hadn't believed him. But tonight, standing there with the world stretched out before me, I finally understood. The house would not be my legacy. My legacy would be the life I chose to live from this moment on. Maybe it would be the Grand Canyon. Maybe it would be a cabin by the sea. Maybe it would be giving back in ways that made me proud. Whatever it was, it would be mine. I smiled into the sunset, the warmth on my face mingling with the cool breeze of evening. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what came next, because I knew, without a doubt, my story was far from over, and this time, I would be the one writing it.